In 1770, roughly 16,000 people lived in Boston. 16,000 souls crammed onto a peninsula no bigger than a few modern city blocks. They woke every morning not knowing if that day would bring bread or bullets, whether the redcoat soldier standing on their corner would let them pass, whether the ship in the harbour carried goods or another regiment of men with muskets. Within 5 years, half these people would flee. Within 10, their city would spark a revolution that changed the world forever. This is what it actually felt like to live there, to wake up, to work, to survive, to watch history unfold from your own front doorstep. If these stories help you wind down at night, a like or subscribe would mean a lot. And I'm always curious where everyone's listening from, so drop your city in the comments if you feel like it. Alright, let's get into it. So we're going back to Boston, the 1760s. And look, before we start, make sure you're settled in. Get comfortable. Adjust whatever needs adjusting. Because colonial Boston in winter, it was brutal. You're going to appreciate that warm bed of yours by the time we're done. The bells of Christchurch are ringing somewhere across the rooftops, and you're already late. You're Daniel, 17 years old, a ropemaker's apprentice on Long Wharf, and right now, you're pulling on frozen boots in a boarding house room that smells like 3 unwashed teenagers and last night's chamber pot. The year is 1765. March. Your breath fogs the air in front of your face as you fumble with the laces. No time for breakfast, but that's fine. You'll grab some beer on the way. Yes, beer for breakfast. Everyone drinks beer here, even kids. The water will kill you faster than the British ever could. Dysentery, cholera, typhoid. One bad well and half your neighbourhood's dead by Tuesday. So you drink beer or cider. From morning to night. Colonial Americans drink about 3 times as much as modern Americans will someday consume, and honestly, given everything else going on, it's probably the only reasonable response. 2 other apprentices share this room with you. William is still snoring in the corner, and the smell coming off him could strip paint. Nobody's bathed in weeks, months maybe. Here's a fun fact about colonial New England. People up here might wash their whole body once a year. Once, if that. Some folks went decades without being, as they put it, wet all over at once. The thinking was that water opened up your pores and let disease in, so everyone just didn't. You get used to the smell eventually, or your nose gives up. Hard to say which. James is already gone because James is always gone before anyone else wakes up. Smart kid, James. You should be more like James. Master Webb doesn't tolerate lateness. The floorboards creak as you stand. They're so cold they feel wet against your stockinged feet. The whole building creaks, actually. Mistress Hutchins, who runs this boarding house, likes it that way. Says she knows exactly who comes and goes at what hour. Any funny business and you're out on the street. Not that you try any funny business. You're too tired for funny business. You're always too tired. The front door sticks. You have to shoulder it open, and then the cold hits you properly. Not the seeping cold of the bedroom. The real cold. The Boston Harbor cold that smells like salt and fish and tar and something else. Something you've never been able to name but which you'd recognize anywhere. The smell of a working port. The smell of ships and money and men who've crossed oceans. Long Wharf stretches out before you in the darkness. Nearly half a mile of wooden planking extending into the harbour, lined with warehouses and counting houses and the dark shapes of vessels tied up alongside. At this hour, torches burn at intervals along the wharf, casting pools of orange light that make the darkness between them seem darker. Men are already moving. Sailors and dock workers and customs officials and the 1,000 other people it takes to keep a port running. And soldiers. You see them immediately. Red coats visible even in the dim light. A patrol of 4 walking along the wharf with their muskets shouldered, their breath steaming. They've been here for a few months now, these redcoats, sent from England to keep order, they say, to enforce the new taxes, to remind Boston who's in charge. Nobody likes them. Nobody wanted them here. 2 years ago there weren't any soldiers in Boston at all, and life was simpler. Now they're everywhere, in the streets, in the taverns, outside the churches on Sunday. They take up lodging in people's houses because there's nowhere else for them to sleep, and the people who have to house them hate it. But you keep your head down. You're an apprentice. You have work to do. Politics is for men with time and money, and you have neither. The rope walk where you work is near the base of the wharf, a long, low building that stretches for over 1,000 feet. That's how rope is made, in case you're wondering. You take hemp fibers and you twist them, and then you twist those twists together, and then you twist those twists together again, over and over until you have something strong enough to hold a ship at anchor in a storm. The building has to be that long because the rope has to be that long. A ship's cable might be 200 fathoms or more. It's hard work. That's the first thing people don't understand about rope making. They think it's just standing around twisting fibers. It's not. It's walking. Miles and miles of walking back and forth down the rope walk, keeping the twist even, keeping the tension right. Your legs ache by noon. By the end of the day they feel like they might fall off, and it's dangerous too. The tar they use to waterproof the finished rope is kept hot in great cauldrons, and if you're not careful, if you brush against one of those cauldrons, you'll have burns that take months to heal. The fibers themselves can slice your hands open if you don't wear your gloves, and the whole building is a fire hazard. All that rope, all that tar, all that dry hemp, one spark in the wrong place, and the whole rope walk goes up. It's happened before. It'll happen again. But this is your trade. This is what you do. This is how you'll spend 7 years of your life, learning everything there is to know about rope, and then maybe you'll have enough to set up your own shop. Or maybe you'll spend the rest of your days working for someone else. Hard to say. The future is a foreign country. You try not to think about it too much. Master Webb is already in the rope walk when you arrive. He's a big man, Master Webb, thick through the chest and arms from decades of this work. His hands are like leather, stained black with tar. He looks at you as you enter but doesn't say anything. That's good. That means you're not late. There are maybe a dozen men working today, which is light. In summer there might be twice that. Boston builds ships, and ships need rope, and there's always more rope needed than hands to make it. But it's March, and some of the seasonal workers have gone to find other employment, until the warm weather brings the work flooding back. You take your place at the spinner. This is where you start every morning, feeding hemp fibers into the spinning machine while your hands twist and pull and guide the material into something usable. It's repetitive work, mind-numbing really, but that's the point. In the morning, when your brain isn't quite awake yet, you don't need work that requires thinking. You need work your hands can do while your thoughts wander, and your thoughts do wander. To the soldiers on the wharf, to the talk in the taverns about taxes and rights and something called the Stamp Act that everybody's angry about, to the news that came last week about protests in New York, people burning effigies of tax collectors, crowds smashing windows, to the murmuring that maybe the same thing will happen here. You don't understand all of it. You're 17. You're an apprentice. You care about making rope and earning your keep, and maybe someday having enough money to rent your own room instead of sharing with William and his snoring. But even you can feel it. This tension in the air, this sense that something is coming, something bigger than any of them, something that's going to change everything. The hours pass, the rope grows, your arms grow tired and then grow numb and then stop complaining altogether as your body gives up on registering the discomfort. That's the secret to manual labour you've learned. Do it long enough and you stop feeling it. Your body just accepts it as normal. Around midday, a commotion outside. Voices raised. You and the other workers drift toward the door to see what's happening. On the wharf, a crowd has gathered. Maybe 50 people. Dock workers and sailors and a few well-dressed merchants too. They're surrounding something. Someone. You push forward, curious despite yourself. It's one of the soldiers. A young one, about your age, in his red coat and white breeches, standing very still while a man twice his size shouts in his face. You can't hear all the words, but you catch enough. Something about the man's sister. Something about inappropriate advances. Something about how if this lobsterback thinks he can behave this way in Boston, he has another thing coming. The soldier says nothing, just stands there. His hands are at his sides, but you can see them trembling slightly. He's scared. You can see that too. He's a kid, just like you, and he's far from home, and 50 angry colonists are screaming at him, and his patrol mates are nowhere to be seen. For a moment, you feel something like sympathy. Then you remember the way the soldiers swagger through the streets, the way they take what they want from shops and don't always pay for it. The way one of them knocked old William Garrett to the ground last week just for walking too slowly past him. The sympathy fades, but the situation doesn't escalate. Not today. A merchant steps forward, says something calming, and slowly the crowd disperses. The soldier hurries away, looking back over his shoulder, his face pale. You go back to work. The rope keeps spinning. The hours keep passing. By evening, your hands are raw and your back aches and you smell like tar and sweat. But you're done for the day. Master Webb pays you your wages in coin, a few pennies that jingle in your pocket as you walk back toward Mistress Hutchins' boarding house. The streets are busy now, the evening crowd out to drink and gossip and forget about their own long days. You pass the Green Dragon Tavern on Union Street and hear laughter spilling out into the night. For a moment you consider going in. A mug of ale would be nice, but ale costs money, and money is something you're trying to save. So you walk on through the narrow streets of Boston's North End, past houses pressed so close together you can hear arguments through the walls, past shops with their shutters closed for the night, past the stocks near the meeting house where they put people who break the Sabbath or drink too much or talk back to their betters. You've seen men stand there all day while neighbours throw rotten vegetables at them. Seen women with their tongues clamped in iron bridles for gossiping. Saw a man get his ears nailed to the wood once for counterfeiting. Nailed. Then cut off when his time was done. This city doesn't mess around. Past the shadow of the Old North Church rising against the stars, it's quieter here. Away from the harbour, away from the taverns. Just the sound of your own footsteps on the cobblestones and the occasional bark of a dog. You think about the soldier again, the fear in his face. You think about the crowd, the anger that seemed to come from somewhere deep, somewhere beyond just this one incident. You think about what James said last night, about how his cousin heard that the Sons of Liberty are planning something big, something that will show the Crown that Boston won't be pushed around anymore. You don't know what any of it means. Not really. You're just a rope maker's apprentice. You wake up before dawn and work until dark and fall into bed exhausted and do it all again the next day. Politics happens somewhere above you, in rooms you'll never enter, between men who wear wigs and speak Latin and have never twisted a fibre of hemp in their lives. But you're starting to understand that it doesn't matter whether you understand it. Whatever's coming, it's coming for everyone. The merchants and the tradesmen and the apprentices and the slaves and the soldiers and the politicians. All of them. All of you. Something is building in this city. Something that hasn't got a name yet. Something that feels like the pressure before a thunderstorm. That heavy electric charge that makes the hair on your arm stand up. You reach Mistress Hutchins' house. The stairs creak as you climb them. William is already snoring. James is reading by candlelight, which is expensive, and you want to tell him to put it out, but you're too tired to argue. You pull off your shoes. You pull off your stockings. You lie down on your straw mattress and pull the thin wool blanket up to your chin and stare at the darkness where the ceiling should be. Tomorrow you'll wake up before dawn again. You'll walk to the rope walk. You'll spin hemp until your fingers bleed. You'll watch the soldiers and the crowds and the tension that never quite explodes but never quite fades either. Tomorrow you'll do what you always do, what everyone in Boston does. You'll survive. And surviving here is no small thing. 4 out of 10 children don't make it to age 6. 4 out of 10. That's not a typo. Your mother had 7 kids. 3 of them died before they could walk. You don't talk about it. Nobody talks about it. It's just how things are. Death is as common as breakfast here, which, speaking of, you still haven't had. The bells of Christchurch sound midnight somewhere in the distance. You close your eyes. Sleep comes slowly, the way it always does. Your thoughts drift like ships in the harbour, bumping against each other, finding their anchor points, settling into stillness. You think about home. You think about your mother. You think about the smell of rope and tar and salt water, which is the smell of your whole life now, which is the smell you'll probably carry to your grave. The room grows warmer, or maybe you're just getting used to the cold. The straw beneath you stops feeling so lumpy. William's snoring fades into background noise, rhythmic as waves against a hull. In the darkness, Boston sleeps. 16,000 people in their beds, in their dreams, in that quiet space between one day and the next. The soldiers sleep in their barracks. The sailors sleep in their hammocks. The merchants sleep in their feather beds. And the slaves sleep in their quarters. And somewhere, in a tavern that won't close for hours yet, men are still talking in low voices about liberty and rights, and what they're willing to do to keep them. But you don't know about any of that. You're 17 years old. You're a rope maker's apprentice. And right now, all you know is the weight of your own exhaustion, the softness of the darkness, the gentle pull of sleep drawing you down like an anchor finding the bottom of the harbour. Tomorrow will come, it always does, but for now, there's only this. 5 months later and Boston is a different city. It's August now, hot. The kind of humid, sticky August heat that makes the whole town smell worse than usual. The harbour reeks of rotting fish and low-tide mud. The streets reek of horse dung baking in the sun. The rope walk where you spend your days reeks of hot tar and sweat, and by noon you're drinking water faster than you can keep it down. But the heat isn't what's changed things. It's the Stamp Act. You've heard that phrase so many times in the last few months that it's lost all meaning. Stamp Act. Stamp Act. Every conversation in every tavern. Every argument on every street corner. The Crown has decided that every piece of paper in the colonies needs a special stamp. Newspapers, legal documents, playing cards, marriage licenses. And these stamps, they cost money. Money that goes straight back to England. People are angry. Not the quiet, grumbling kind of angry that fades after a few ales. This is something else. This is the kind of angry that makes men do stupid things. You find this out on August 14th. The morning starts normal enough. You wake up with the bells, same as always. Pull on your clothes, same as always. Walk down to Long Wharf through streets that are already busy with merchants and sailors and the usual chaos of a port town waking up. The harbour is crowded with ships, their masts sticking up like a forest of bare trees against the morning sky. You count maybe 40 vessels at anchor today, which is good. More ships means more rope needed. But something feels off. You can't put your finger on it at first. Just this prickle at the back of your neck. People walking a little faster than usual. Conversation stopping when strangers pass by. That feeling you get when everyone knows something you don't. At the rope walk, Master Webb is in a foul mood. He barks orders and snaps at anyone who moves too slow, which is not like him. Usually he's gruff but fair. Today he seems wound tight as one of his own cables. Around mid-morning, James appears at your elbow. He's supposed to be working the far end of the walk, but here he is, eyes bright with something that looks like excitement. "You hear about the tree?" he asks, keeping his voice low. "What tree?" "The big elm. Down on Orange Street near the corner of Essex. Someone hung something from it last night." You don't understand what he's talking about, and your face must show it, because James grabs your arm and pulls you toward the door. "Come on. You need to see this. Webb will kill us." "Webb won't notice. Half the workers are already gone. Haven't you looked around?" You look around. He's right. The rope walk, which should have a dozen men working, has maybe 5. The others have slipped away while you weren't paying attention. So you go. You and James, walking fast through the crowded streets, past Faneuil Hall where the market sellers are doing brisk trade, past the old State House with its lion and unicorn perched on the roof like they own the place, past shops and counting houses and a group of redcoats who watch you pass with hard eyes but don't stop you. The crowd gets thicker as you get closer to Orange Street. By the time you reach the corner of Essex, you can barely push through. Must be 200 people here, maybe more, all of them staring up at the same thing. It's an elm tree, a big one, maybe 100 years old, its branches spreading wide over the street, and hanging from one of those branches, swinging gently in the hot August breeze, is a body. Your stomach drops. You've seen dead men before. Sailors pulled from the harbour, bloated and blue, a dock worker crushed by a falling crate. But this is different. This is a hanging. This is... James is laughing. "It's not real," he says, seeing your face. "Look closer." You look closer, and you see what he means. It's not a body, it's an effigy. A stuffed dummy dressed in fine clothes, with a face painted on a sack and a sign hung around its neck. The sign reads, A.O. "Andrew Oliver," James explains. "He's supposed to be the stamp distributor, the man who's going to collect all those taxes of the crown." "They hung a dummy of him?" "Someone did. Last night. Nobody knows who." James grins. "Well, somebody knows. But nobody's talking." You stare up at the effigy. Someone's added a boot to it with the initials of another hated official. Someone else hung a sign that reads, "He that takes this down is an enemy to his country." And here's the thing, nobody takes it down. Not the sheriff, who shows up and takes one look at the crowd and quietly leaves. Not the governor's men. Not anyone. The whole British Empire, the most powerful force on earth, and they can't remove a stuffed dummy from a tree because a bunch of angry colonists are standing around glaring at them. That's when you start to understand something. They need us to cooperate, and we're done cooperating. You stare up at the effigy, swaying in the breeze, and you feel something strange in your chest. Fear, maybe. But also something else. Something that feels a little like excitement. Like standing at the edge of a cliff and looking down. People around you are talking, laughing, pointing up at the dummy. Someone starts a chant. No stamps. No stamps. Others take it up. The sound swells until it fills the street, bouncing off the buildings, loud enough to be heard halfway across Boston. No stamps. No stamps. You find yourself mouthing the words, not shouting them, not yet, but mouthing them, tasting them. A man pushes through the crowd, well dressed, with a good coat and a silver-headed walking stick. He stares up at the effigy with a look on his face that you can't quite read. Disgust, maybe, or fear, or both. "This is treason," he says, loud enough for people around him to hear. "You'll all hang for this." Someone laughs. Someone else throws something, a piece of rotten fruit maybe, and it splatters against the man's good coat. He stumbles backward, shocked, and the crowd closes around him for a moment before he manages to fight his way free and disappear down a side street. The laughter gets louder. The chanting gets louder. And you realize, standing there in the August heat with sweat running down your back and the sound of rebellion ringing in your ears, that something has shifted. Something has broken loose. Boston has taken a step that can't be taken back. You and James stay until noon, watching. More people arrive. The crowd swells to maybe 500, then more. A few men climb the tree and add a boot to the effigy, painted with the initials of a hated tax collector. Someone else hangs a sign that says, "He that takes this down is an enemy to his country," and nobody takes it down. Not the sheriff who shows up around midday and takes one look at the crowd and quietly leaves. Not the governor's men, who are conspicuously absent. Not the redcoats, who seem to have vanished from this part of town entirely. The tree stands, the effigy swings, and Boston holds its breath. By afternoon, you're back at the rope walk, pretending you never left. Master Webb knows better. He can see it in your face, probably, but he doesn't say anything. Maybe because half his workers were at that tree too. Maybe because he was thinking about going himself. The work continues. The rope spins out under your hands, yard after yard after yard. Your muscles move through the familiar motions while your mind stays back at Orange Street, replaying what you saw. The crowd, the chanting, the man with the good coat and the fear in his eyes. Is this what revolution looks like? You don't know. You're 17 years old. You make rope for a living. What do you know about revolutions? But something in you has woken up, some part that was sleeping before, and it's not going back to sleep. That night, the real trouble starts. You're back at Mistress Hutchins' boarding house, lying on your mattress and listening to William snore when you hear it, shouting, the sound of many feet on cobblestones, glass breaking somewhere in the distance. James sits up in the darkness. They're going to Oliver's house. Who is? The mob. Everyone. Come on. You should stay in bed. You know you should stay in bed. Tomorrow is a work day. Master Webb won't tolerate you showing up half dead from a night of running the streets. But James is already pulling on his boots, and the sounds outside are getting louder, and that thing in your chest, that new awake thing, won't let you lie still. So you go. The streets are chaos. Torches everywhere, casting wild shadows on the buildings. Men running in groups, some carrying clubs, some carrying axes. Women watching from doorways with their children pulled close. Dogs barking. Someone singing a song you don't recognize, something about liberty and death. You follow the noise to a building on Kilby Street, a new building still under construction. Word is that Oliver planned to use it as his stamp office. That's the rumour anyway. Whether it's true or not doesn't seem to matter anymore. The crowd is tearing it apart. You watch, stunned, as men attack the building with axes and hammers in their bare hands. Wood splinters, glass shatters. The frame groans and then gives way, collapsing in a cloud of dust while the crowd roars its approval. And then someone shouts, "To Oliver's house! To his house!" The mob surges forward. You're swept along with it, pushed and pulled by bodies you can't see, carried through streets you barely recognize in the darkness and the torchlight. James is somewhere beside you, his face lit orange by the flames, his eyes wide and wild. This is madness. This is absolute madness. And you can't stop. You don't want to stop. Oliver's house is a fine one down near Fort Hill. By the time the mob arrives, the man himself has fled. Smart of him. Because what happens next isn't pretty. They start with the windows, every pane of glass smashed. Then the door, battered in with a log that must have taken 20 men to carry. Then they're inside, and you can hear crashes and screams and laughter echoing out into the night. Furniture comes flying through broken windows. Paintings, books, fine china that shatters on the cobblestones. Someone finds Oliver's wine cellar and bottles start passing through the crowd, hand to hand, mouth to mouth. You don't go inside. Something holds you back. Some last shred of the boy who just wants to make rope and earn his keep and stay out of trouble. You stand in the street and watch, and feel your heart pounding like it's trying to escape your chest. A man stumbles out of the house wearing one of Oliver's wigs, doing an exaggerated bow while the crowd howls with laughter. Another man follows carrying a portrait, holds it up for everyone to see, then throws it on a fire that's been started in the middle of the street. The flames leap. The crowd cheers. Someone's found Oliver's wine cellar and is passing bottles around. A woman near you is wearing what looks like one of Mrs. Oliver's dresses, twirling in the firelight like she's at a ball. It's chaos. It's madness. It's also, you realise with a chill, extremely well organised. Nobody's looting the silverware. Nobody's taken anything valuable. They're destroying it, burning it, making a point. This isn't a robbery, it's a message. And somewhere in the city, church bells start ringing. Not for a fire, not for a funeral, for something new. Something that doesn't have a name yet. By dawn, it's over. The mob melts away as the first grey light creeps over the harbour. Men who were screaming for blood a few hours ago walk quietly home to their wives and children, their faces tired, their hands dirty. You make it back to Mistress Hutchins' place just as the bells ring for morning. No sleep. Your eyes burn. Your throat is raw from smoke and shouting. But you have to work. If you don't work, you don't eat. So you wash your face in cold water, pull on your work clothes, and walk down to the rope walk like nothing happened. Master Webb looks at you when you arrive, looks at the soot on your face that you didn't quite get off, looks at the redness in your eyes. He opens his mouth like he's going to say something, then he closes it again, nods toward the spinner, and you get to work. The rope doesn't care about revolutions. The rope just needs to be twisted yard after yard, same as yesterday, same as tomorrow. Your hands know what to do. Your body moves through the motions, and your mind drifts back to the night before. The shouting, the fire, the portrait curling and blackening in the flames. Is this the beginning, or is this the end of something? You don't know. You're too tired to know. You're too tired for anything except putting one foot in front of the other, twisting one strand around another, staying awake long enough to earn your pay and go home and fall into bed. But even as you work, you can feel it. The city has changed. Something cracked open last night and it's not going to close again. Outside the rope walk, Boston is quiet. Too quiet. The usual bustle of the harbour seems muted, hushed. People walking with their heads down, avoiding each other's eyes. Soldiers patrolling in pairs, their hands on their muskets. Everyone waiting. Everyone wondering what happens next. And you? You're just a rope maker's apprentice. 17 years old. Hands covered in tar, back aching from work, eyes stinging from smoke and lack of sleep. But you were there. You saw it. And something in you has changed too. You just don't know what yet. The day passes slowly, slower than any day you can remember. Every hour feels like 3. Every yard of rope feels like a mile. By the time Master Webb dismisses you, the sun is already setting, painting the harbour in shades of red and orange that look too much like the fires from last night. You walk back to the boarding house through streets that feel different now. The same buildings, the same cobblestones, the same smell of salt and fish and tar. But everything has shifted somehow, like looking at a familiar face and suddenly seeing someone new behind the eyes. William is asleep already when you get back. James is sitting on his bed, staring at nothing, his face pale in the candlelight. They say Hutchinson's house is next, he whispers. The Lieutenant Governor. They say the mob is going after him tomorrow night. You don't answer. You're too tired to answer. You pull off your boots and lie down and close your eyes and try not to think about anything at all. Sleep takes you fast this time, deep and dreamless. Your body giving up the fight, surrendering to exhaustion. Tomorrow more rope. Tomorrow more work. Tomorrow maybe more chaos. But right now, there's only the darkness behind your eyes. Only the steady rhythm of William's snoring. Only the distant sound of the harbour, waves lapping against hulls, ships creaking at their moorings. Boston sleeps, or tries to sleep, waiting for whatever comes next. Andrew Oliver resigned his position as stamp distributor the day after the mob destroyed his house. Smart man. He stood on the stump of the Liberty Tree, that same elm on Orange Street, and announced to a crowd of thousands that he wanted nothing more to do with stamps or taxes or anything that might bring another visit from his neighbours in the night. The crowd cheered. Someone bought drinks for the whole street, and for a little while Boston felt like it had won something. But then November came, and the Stamp Act was supposed to go into effect, and suddenly nobody knew what would happen. Would ships refuse to sail without stamped papers? Would the courts close? Would business grind to a halt? Turns out, Boston had an answer for that too. They just ignored the whole thing. Ships sailed anyway. Courts stayed open. Newspapers printed without stamps. And the Crown, 3,000 miles away across an ocean, couldn't do a thing about it. You learned all this in pieces over weeks and months, conversations at the rope walk, gossip at the market, and eventually at the Green Dragon. The first time you actually walked through those doors was in late October, a few weeks after your 18th birthday. James dragged you in. He'd been spending more time there lately, coming back to the boarding house late at night smelling like tobacco and rum, with a look on his face like he knew secrets he couldn't share. You need to meet some people, he said. That's all he'd tell you. The tavern was on Union Street, a wooden building with a sign hanging over the door. The sign showed a dragon, painted green, looking fierce and a little ridiculous at the same time. Inside, the main room was crowded and loud and thick with pipe smoke. Men packed around rough wooden tables, drinking ale and arguing about politics and laughing at jokes you couldn't hear. Here's something about colonial taverns. They're basically the internet of the 1760s. Post office, tavern, news, tavern, courthouse, sometimes a tavern, political organising, definitely a tavern. The average colonist drinks about 3.5 gallons of alcohol a year, and most of it gets consumed in places like this. Boston alone has over 100 licensed taverns for 16,000 people. That's one tavern for every 160 residents. These people like to drink and talk and drink while talking. James led you through the crowd, nodding at people he knew, until you reached a door at the back. A big man stood beside it, arms crossed, watching everyone who passed with flat, careful eyes. "He's with me," James said. The big man looked at you. Really looked, like he was memorizing your face. Then he stepped aside. Behind the door was a staircase leading down. You followed James into a basement room that was smaller than the one upstairs, but somehow more intense. Maybe 24 men sat around tables or stood in small clusters, talking in low voices. Candles flickered on the walls. The air smelled like beer and sweat and something else, something sharp. Danger, maybe. Or just the smell of men planning things they shouldn't be planning. "Welcome to the Dragon's Den," James said with a grin. You recognised some faces. A silversmith from the North End who'd done some work for Master Webb. A printer whose shop you'd walked past 100 times. A doctor still wearing his good coat, and mixed in with them, ordinary working men. Rope makers like you. Coopers and blacksmiths and dock workers. All of them here, in this basement, doing something that felt important even if you didn't understand what yet. A man approached you, older, maybe 40, with a face that looked like it had seen trouble and come out the other side. He had ink stains on his fingers. "James says you were at Oliver's house that night." It wasn't a question. "I was in the street," you said. "I didn't go inside." "But you were there." "Yes." He studied you for a long moment. Then he stuck out his hand. "Name's Eades, Benjamin Eades. I print the Gazette." You shook his hand. His grip was firm, his palm rough with calluses. "The Gazette's been writing about the Stamp Act," you said. Stupid thing to say. Everyone knew the Gazette had been writing about the Stamp Act. But Eades just smiled. "We've been writing about a lot of things, and we're going to keep writing. The question is, are men like you going to keep reading, keep showing up, keep making sure the Crown knows we won't be pushed around?" You didn't know how to answer that. A month ago you were just a rope maker. Now you were standing in a basement with men who were talking about pushing back against the most powerful empire in the world. "I'll show up," you heard yourself say. Eades nodded like that was the answer he expected. "Good man. James, get him something to drink." That first night you mostly listened, sat in a corner with a mug of ale and watched and absorbed. The conversations flowed around you, full of names and plans and grievances you didn't fully understand. Someone mentioned Samuel Adams, and heads nodded with respect. Someone else talked about letters being sent to the other colonies, to New York and Philadelphia and Virginia, about coordinating resistance. Someone used the phrase "Sons of Liberty," and a ripple went through the room, men sitting up straighter, eyes brighter. You didn't speak up. What would you say? You were 18 years old. You made rope. These men were printers and merchants and doctors, men with education and money and connections. What did you have to offer? But James caught your eye across the room and gave you a small nod, and somehow that was enough. You belonged here. You didn't know why yet, but you belonged. The months that followed were strange ones. On the surface, nothing changed. You still woke up before dawn, still walked to the rope walk, still twisted hemp until your arms ached. Master Webb still barked orders. William still snored. The harbour still stank of fish and tar. But underneath, everything was different. 2 or 3 nights a week, you'd slip out of the boarding house after dark and make your way to the Green Dragon. Sometimes the basement was crowded, sometimes just a handful of men. You learned to recognize faces, to remember names. You learned the rhythms of resistance, the way information flowed from one trusted source to another, the careful dance of who knew what and who could be told. You learned that the Sons of Liberty weren't just one group. They were everywhere, in every colony. Farmers and lawyers and shopkeepers and sailors, all of them angry about the same things, all of them pushing back against a government that treated them like children to be managed rather than citizens to be respected. And you learned that you weren't useless after all. Rope makers heard things. Sailors talked on the docks, unguarded, assuming nobody was listening. Information about troop movements, about ships arriving from England, about what the customs officials were planning. You had ears and you had access and you had a reason to be places where interesting conversations happened. So you started listening, really listening, and reporting back what you heard. It wasn't much, a snippet here, a rumour there, but Edie's took every piece of information seriously, writing it down in a little leather book he kept in his coat pocket. You never know what's going to matter, he told you once. The thing that seems like nothing today might be the key to everything tomorrow. Winter came hard that year. Snow piled up in the streets, and the harbour froze solid enough to walk on. Work at the rope walk slowed to a crawl. Ships couldn't sail, which meant ships didn't need rope, which meant you spent long days with nothing to do but stay warm and wait. The cold was brutal, not like any winter you remembered. The boarding house felt like an icebox, and even with all 3 of you huddled around the tiny fireplace, your breath still fogged in the air. Mistress Hutchins rationed the firewood, said it was expensive this year, said everyone would have to make do. You wore your coat to bed, your stockings too. Still woke up shivering most mornings. Here's a fun thing about colonial winters. If you're poor and you don't have enough firewood, you might actually freeze to death in your own home. Happens all the time. Old folks mostly. Babies. Anyone too weak to keep the fire going. The wealthy hire servants to tend their fires around the clock. You wake up at 3 a.m. with ice on the inside of the windows and pray the embers haven't gone completely cold. Food got scarce when the harbour froze. No ships coming in meant no fresh supplies, and the prices at the market climbed until a loaf of bread cost twice what it had in autumn. You learned to make do with less. A bowl of thin porridge in the morning, maybe some salt pork at midday if you were lucky. Your belt got tighter, so did everyone else's, but you didn't complain. Nobody complained. Compared to what some folks had, you were doing fine. At least you had a roof. At least you had work waiting when the thaw came. Some people had nothing at all. You spent a lot of that winter at the Green Dragon. The basement became almost like a second home. You got to know the regulars. The silversmith, whose name was Paul, had a way of drawing people out, making them feel like their opinions mattered. The doctor, Joseph, always seemed to know things before anyone else, like he had sources nobody could identify. And there was John, a rich merchant's son who dressed like he was going to a ball, even when he was just drinking ale in a basement, but who gave money freely to causes he believed in. They became something like friends. Or maybe not friends exactly. Something else. Brothers in a fight that none of you had asked for, but none of you could walk away from. You learned the rituals of the place, the way men would check over their shoulders before speaking freely, the way certain words were never said aloud, only hinted at, the way everyone knew who the informers might be and adjusted their conversations accordingly. It was like learning a new language, a language of glances and silences and things left unsaid. The tavern upstairs was one world, loud, public, full of sailors and merchants conducting ordinary business. The basement was another, quieter, more careful, a place where men could speak their minds without worrying who might be listening. You learned to move between those worlds. Upstairs for a drink and a laugh after work, downstairs when the real conversations happened. It became second nature after a while, like having two lives that only you knew about. One night in late February, word came through that changed everything. You were in the basement when a man burst through the door, breathless, snow melting in his hair. He'd just come from the docks, he said. A ship had arrived from England with news. The Stamp Act had been repealed. For a moment nobody moved. Then someone let out a whoop, and the room exploded. Men hugging each other, pounding backs, shouting so loud it must have been heard in the street above. Someone produced a bottle of good rum, and it made the rounds, everyone taking a drink, toasting to victory. You found yourself laughing, though you weren't sure why. Your eyes were wet. So were other men's eyes, though nobody mentioned it. "We did it," James said, grabbing your shoulders. "We actually did it." Had you done it? You weren't sure. You'd made rope and listened at the docks and sat in a basement drinking ale while other men made plans. But maybe that was enough. Maybe that was what resistance looked like. Not just the big gestures, the mobs and the riots and the effigies swinging from trees, but the small things too. The showing up, the refusing to go along quietly, the being part of something bigger than yourself. The celebration went on until dawn. By the time you stumbled back to the boarding house, the sun was coming up over the harbour, painting the snow pink and gold. Your head throbbed, your legs felt like they might give out. But you were smiling. It was over. The Stamp Act was dead. Boston had won. Except it wasn't over. Not really. You learned that soon enough. The repeal came with strings attached. Parliament passed something called the Declaratory Act, which basically said that even though they were backing down on stamps, they still had the right to tax the colonies whenever they wanted. They were just choosing not to, for now. And the soldiers were still there. That was the thing that got harder to ignore as the months passed and the snow melted and spring turned the harbour from ice to mud. The redcoats hadn't left. If anything, there were more of them, patrolling the streets, watching the docks, standing outside the Green Dragon some nights like they knew exactly what was happening inside. The tension that had exploded in August didn't go away. It just went underground, simmering, waiting. You felt it every day at the rope walk. The workers talked in lower voices now, glanced over their shoulders before saying anything that might be considered dangerous. A man named Patrick got into an argument with a soldier over a card game and ended up with a broken nose. A shop owner on King Street had his windows smashed after someone accused him of being a loyalist. Boston was a city holding its breath, everyone waiting for the next thing to happen, nobody knowing what that thing would be. At the Green Dragon, the conversations grew more serious, less celebration, more planning. What would they do if Parliament passed another tax? What would they do if more soldiers came? What would they do if the Crown decided to make an example of someone? You sat in those meetings and listened and felt something heavy settling in your chest. This wasn't going to end with the Stamp Act. This was just the beginning. And wherever it went, you were part of it now, for better or worse. One night, walking back to the boarding house through streets still damp from a spring rain, you passed the Liberty Tree. It looked different now, quieter. The crowds had moved on, but someone had carved words into the trunk. You stopped to read them in the faint light of a nearby window. Sons of Liberty. 3 words, carved deep into the bark. A mark that would stay there for years, maybe decades, long after the men who carved it were gone. You stood there for a long time looking at those words, thinking about Oliver and his ruined house, about Edie's and his leather notebook, about James and his bright eyes, about all the things that had happened since that March morning when you were just a rope maker's apprentice who didn't know anything about politics or rebellion or what it meant to be part of something bigger than yourself. The city slept around you. 16,000 people, dreaming their separate dreams, not knowing what was coming, not knowing that in a few years these streets would run with blood. But you knew, or at least you suspected, standing there in the rain, looking at words carved into a tree. You understood that this wasn't over. It was just beginning. 2 years passed. Quiet years, mostly. The kind of years that make you think maybe things are settling down, maybe the worst is over, maybe you can go back to just being a rope maker without all the rest of it. You should have known better. By 1767, you're 20 years old, not a boy anymore. Your shoulders have filled out from years of pulling and twisting at the walk. Your hands are scarred and calloused, permanently stained with tar. Master Webb has started giving you more responsibility, letting you supervise the younger apprentices, trusting you with the finer work that requires experience. You're good at this job. Turns out you're good at most things if you do them long enough. James finished his apprenticeship last spring. He's working at a different rope walk now, down near Griffin's Wharf, earning journeyman wages. You still see him at the Green Dragon most weeks, still share a drink and catch up on news, but it's different now. He's got a girl he's courting, a cooper's daughter named Sarah who blushes every time his name comes up. He's thinking about the future, marriage, children, a shop of his own someday. You think about those things too sometimes. Late at night, lying on your mattress, listening to the new apprentice snore in the corner. William's gone too, shipped out on a merchant vessel bound for the West Indies. Said he wanted to see something other than Boston before he got too old. You wonder sometimes if he made it. If he's somewhere warm right now, drinking rum under palm trees while you freeze through another New England winter. But mostly you don't think about the future. There's too much happening in the present. Parliament passed new taxes. Again. They're calling it the Townshend Acts, after the minister who dreamed them up. Taxes on glass, lead, paper, paint, and tea. Everything the colonies need to import from England. The money's supposed to pay for the soldiers stationed here, which feels like a special kind of insult, making us pay for our own occupation. The Green Dragon has been busy. More meetings, more planning, more talk about what to do. The non-importation agreements are back. Merchants pledging not to buy British goods until the taxes are repealed. Lists published in the Gazette naming anyone who breaks the agreement. Crowds gathering outside the shops of men who refuse to sign. It's not as dramatic as the riots back in '65. No effigies swinging from trees, no houses torn apart. But there's a tension now that doesn't let up. A low hum of anger that runs through everything, every conversation, every transaction, every sideways glance between colonists and soldiers on the street. And there are more soldiers now. A lot more. They started arriving in October of 68, ship after ship sailing into the harbour, unloading regiment after regiment, the 14th, the 29th, artillery units with their cannons. By the time they stopped coming, there were nearly 4,000 troops in a town of 16,000 people. One soldier for every 4 civilians. Think about that for a second. One armed soldier for every 4 people. In your neighbourhood, on your street, outside your church. Imagine going to get groceries and passing a guy with a musket every 30 feet. That's Boston now. They set up camp on Boston Common. Tents first, then wooden barracks when it became clear they weren't leaving anytime soon. The Common, which used to be where children played and cattle grazed and people took walks on pleasant evenings, turned into a military camp. Drums at dawn, drill formations all morning, soldiers everywhere you looked, their red coats bright as blood against the green grass. And here's the part that really gets people angry. The soldiers are bored. There's nothing for them to do. They're young men, far from home, with no wars to fight and no enemies to kill. So they drink, they fight, they harass women, they steal from shops and claim they forgot to pay. They're paid almost nothing by the Crown, so they look for side jobs, undercutting local workers. They're miserable, we're miserable, and everyone's just waiting for something to explode. You walked past it one morning on your way to work. Couldn't help yourself, just wanted to see. The scale of it hit you like a fist, rows and rows of white tents stretching across the grass. Cannons positioned at the corners, their barrels pointing outward toward the town. Soldiers marching in formation, their boots stamping the earth in perfect unison, while a sergeant barked commands. The smoke from cooking fires drifting across the field, mixing with the morning fog rolling in from the harbour. A few other townspeople had stopped to watch. An old woman with a basket of bread. A boy, maybe 10 years old, staring at the soldiers with something between fear and fascination. A man in a merchant's coat, his face tight with an emotion you couldn't read. Nobody spoke. What was there to say? Behind the camp, the province house rose against the sky. That was where the royal governor lived, the man appointed by the king to keep Massachusetts in line. His windows overlook the common, so he could watch his soldiers drill from the comfort of his breakfast table. You wondered what he thought when he looked out at all those red coats. Pride, probably. Satisfaction. The feeling of a man who's got everything under control. You hoped he enjoyed it while it lasted. The old State House, that handsome brick building where the colonial government met, now had soldiers stationed at every door. So did Faneuil Hall. So did the Customs House. The message was clear. This is our city now. We control it. You just live here. You remember the day they landed, standing on Long Wharf with hundreds of others, watching the boats row ashore, watching the soldiers form up in their perfect ranks. Nobody said anything. The whole crowd just stood there in silence, watching. A few women were crying. A few men had their fists clenched at their sides, knuckles white. The officer in charge, a man named Dalrymple, read a proclamation. Something about keeping the peace, restoring order. You don't remember the words. You just remember the feeling, like the city had been punched in the gut and couldn't breathe. At the rope walk, things got complicated. Soldiers need money. The Crown pays them, but not much. So they look for side work, odd jobs, anything to supplement their wages. And some of them, The ones with strong backs and nothing better to do started showing up at the rope walks looking for employment. Master Webb turned them away at first. So did most of the other masters, but some didn't. Some figured cheap labour was cheap labour, whatever colour coat it came in, and that's when the trouble really started. See, rope making is a trade. You spend years learning it. You earn your place. And then these soldiers come in, willing to work for half the wages, taking jobs that should go to Boston men. It's not just about money, though the money matters. It's about respect, about who belongs here and who doesn't. Fights broke out, small ones at first. A soldier and a rope maker trading insults, then trading punches. But they got worse over time. Clubs and knives started appearing. A soldier got his skull cracked behind a warehouse near Griffin's Wharf. A rope maker got stabbed outside a tavern on Ann Street. One day at your own rope walk, a soldier came looking for work. Young fellow, couldn't have been more than 19. He stood in the doorway, hat in hand, asking if there were any jobs going. Master Webb was working at the far end of the walk. He looked up, saw the red coat, and his face went hard. "No work here." "Please, sir, I can spin. I worked at a rope walk back in London before I enlisted. I just need a few shillings to send home to my mother." For a second, just a second, you almost felt sorry for him. He looked thin, hungry maybe, far from home and desperate. But then one of the other workers, a man named Samuel, stepped forward. "You heard the master. No work. Now get out before we throw you out." The soldier's face flushed. "I'm not looking for trouble." "Then you shouldn't have come here wearing that coat." They stared at each other for a long moment. You could feel the tension crackling in the air. Everyone in the rope walk had stopped working, watching, waiting to see what would happen. The soldier blinked first, turned and walked out without another word. But as he passed you, standing near the door, he muttered something under his breath. You couldn't hear all of it, but you caught enough. "Get what's coming to you. All of you." You watched him go, watched him rejoin his patrol down the street, and you thought about what it must be like, being hated by everyone in a city you're supposed to be protecting, having doors slammed in your face, being called a lobster back and a bloody back and worse, every single day. It didn't make you like them, but it made you understand something. This wasn't just us against them. It was scared people against scared people. Everyone afraid, everyone angry, everyone waiting for something to break. The masters tried to keep things calm. So did the officers. Nobody wanted a full-scale brawl. But the anger was always there, simmering just below the surface. All it would take was one spark. You tried to stay out of it, kept your head down, did your work, went to the Green Dragon at night and then home to bed. But it was hard. The soldiers were everywhere, in the streets, in the taverns, outside the churches. You couldn't go a day without some kind of confrontation. One afternoon in late summer, you were walking back from the market when a group of soldiers blocked your path. 4 of them, young, maybe your age or younger. They'd been drinking. You could smell it on them from 10 feet away. Rum and sweat and that particular stink of men who haven't bathed in months. Which, to be fair, describes most of Boston. But on them it seems worse somehow. "Where you going, rope man?" You didn't answer. Just tried to step around them. One of them grabbed your arm. "I asked you a question." "Home. I'm going home." "Home?" He said it like it was funny. "You hear that, boys? The rebel's going home." The others laughed. The one holding your arm squeezed tighter. He had a pockmarked face and yellow teeth and breath that could knock a horse unconscious. His uniform was dirty, the red faded to something like rust. Up close, These aren't the fearsome soldiers of the British Empire. They're kids. Hungry, underpaid kids with muskets, which somehow makes the whole thing worse. "We know about you lot," he said, "meeting in your tavern basements, plotting against the king. You think we don't know?" Your heart was pounding, but you kept your face steady. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't." He shoved you backward, hard enough that you stumbled into the wall behind you. Your head cracked against the brick. Stars burst across your vision. When you could see again, the pockmarked soldier was right in your face. "Just remember something, Rope Man. We're not going anywhere. This is our city now. Best get used to it." They walked away laughing. You stood there for a long moment, your back against the wall, your hands shaking with rage you couldn't do anything about. Blood trickled down the back of your neck where your head had hit the bricks. A woman passing by gave you a sympathetic look but didn't stop. Nobody stopped. Stopping meant getting involved. Getting involved meant trouble. You touched the back of your head. Your fingers came away red. Not a lot of blood, but enough. That night at the Green Dragon, you told Eads what happened. He listened without interrupting, his face grim. "It's going to get worse before it gets better," he said when you finished. "They want us to strike first, give them an excuse to crack down even harder. So what do? We wait, we watch, we keep our heads." He put a hand on your shoulder, "and we don't give them what they want." It was good advice, you tried to follow it, but every day it got harder. The winter of '68 was one of the coldest you could remember. The harbour froze solid again, ice stretching all the way out to the islands. The soldiers in their tents on the common suffered badly. You heard stories of men freezing to death in their sleep, of frostbite so bad they had to amputate fingers and toes. Part of you felt something like satisfaction at that. Part of you felt ashamed for feeling it. They were just men after all. Young men, far from home, doing what they were told. Not so different from you, really. But then you'd remember the soldier's hand on your arm, the sneer in his voice, and the sympathy would fade. By spring, the situation had settled into an ugly routine. Soldiers on one side, townspeople on the other, both watching, both waiting. Small confrontations every day. Insults traded, punches thrown. Nothing quite bad enough to spark a war, but nothing good either. The Green Dragon stayed busy. More men attending the meetings now. Not just the original group, but new faces. Dock workers and tradesmen, and even a few merchants who'd kept their distance before. The occupation had pushed people together, forged alliances that hadn't existed before. You saw Paul the silversmith almost every night. He'd taken on a leadership role, organising messengers, keeping track of troop movements, making sure information flowed to the people who needed it. He had a gift for that kind of work. Steady hands, steady nerves, the kind of man you'd trust with your life. Joseph the doctor was busy too. He'd been tending to men injured in brawls with soldiers, and each new patient seemed to harden his resolve. "This can't go on," he said one night, his voice tight with anger. "Something has to give." Something would give. You knew it. Everyone knew it. The pressure had been building for too long. Sooner or later the dam would break. You just didn't know when, or how, or who would be standing in the path when the flood came. The days lengthened into summer. The common stayed full of soldiers. The rope walk stayed busy with orders. You twisted hemp and pulled cables and tried not to think about the winter ahead, or the winter after that, or all the winters to come with redcoats on every corner and guns pointed at your neighbours. At night, You'd lie on your mattress and listen to the city outside your window. Dogs barking, someone singing badly in a tavern down the street. The distant drums from the common, keeping time to a rhythm that had nothing to do with Boston, nothing to do with you. But it did have something to do with you. Everything did now. You'd chosen a side, or maybe the side had chosen you. Either way, there was no going back. Somewhere out there, in the darkness, the future was taking shape. You couldn't see it yet, but you could feel it, coming closer, getting clearer. All you had to do was wait. By 1770, you'd stopped counting the days. Time moved differently under occupation. The seasons changed. The work continued. Ships came and went from the harbour. But underneath all of it, everything felt suspended, like the whole city was holding its breath, waiting for something that never quite arrived. You're 22 now, 5 years since you first walked through the doors of the Green Dragon, 5 years of meetings and whispers and careful conversations, 5 years of watching the tension build and build without ever breaking. Master Webb retired in the autumn. His hands had gotten too stiff for the work, he said. Too many winters, too much rope. He sold the business to his nephew, a man named Gray, who ran a bigger operation down near the harbour. You went with the sale, transferred like a piece of equipment, which is pretty much what an employee was in those days. Gray's rope walk was larger than Webb's. More workers, more orders, more of everything. The building stretched along the waterfront, a long wooden structure that creaked in the wind and smelled permanently of tar and hemp. You knew some of the men from before, recognized faces from the Green Dragon, from the crowds at the Liberty Tree. Good men mostly, hard workers, the kind of men who kept their heads down and did their jobs but wouldn't back down if pushed. And they were being pushed. Every day it seemed like. The soldiers had gotten bolder over the winter, or maybe just more desperate. Their pay was late again, the way it always seemed to be late, and hungry men do stupid things. They came round the rope walks looking for work, same as before. But now they didn't ask nicely. Now they demanded. One morning in late February, a group of them showed up at Gray's. 4 soldiers, led by a big man with sergeant's stripes on his sleeve. They walked right into the building like they owned it, looking around at the equipment, at the workers, at the bales of hemp stacked against the walls. "We're here for jobs," the sergeant said, not asking, telling. Gray was a smaller man than Webb, but he had the same iron in his spine. "No jobs here, not for you." "That's so?" The sergeant smiled, but there was nothing friendly in it. "Seems to me you've got plenty of work. Seems to me you could use some extra hands." "I've got all the hands I need." The soldiers spread out, walking along the rope walk, running their fingers over the equipment. One of them picked up a coil of finished rope, hefted it, set it back down. Another kicked at a bale of hemp like he was testing it. "Nice place you've got here," the sergeant said. "Be a shame if something happened to it." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. You could hear the harbour outside, the cry of gulls, the creak of ships at anchor. Everything else was silent. Gray's voice was steady when he answered. "Are you threatening me, Sergeant?" "Threatening? No, sir, just making an observation." The sergeant's smile got wider. "Lot of things can happen to a building like this. Accidents, fires. You know how it is." He turned and walked out. The other soldiers followed. Nobody said anything until they were gone, until their footsteps had faded down the street. Then Gray looked around at his workers, at you, at all the men standing there with clenched fists and tight jaws. "Back to work," he said quietly. "All of you, back to work." You went back to work. What else could you do? but something had shifted. You could feel it in the air, in the way men looked at each other, in the silence that had replaced the usual jokes and complaints. The sergeant's threat hung over everything like smoke. That night at the Green Dragon, the mood was dark. Word had spread about what happened at Gray's Rope Walk. Similar stories were coming in from all over town. Soldiers harassing shopkeepers, soldiers picking fights in taverns, soldiers stopping people in the street, demanding to see papers, asking questions that felt more like accusations. "They're trying to provoke us," Ida said. He looked tired, older than you remembered. "They want a fight. They want an excuse to crack down." "Maybe we should give them one," someone muttered from the back of the room. Eads shook his head. "That's exactly what they want. We can't be the ones who start this." "Then when does it end? How much are we supposed to take?" Nobody had an answer for that. 3 days later, Christopher Sider died. He was 11 years old, just a boy. 11. He'd been part of a crowd outside a shop on Middle Street, a shop owned by a man named Richardson, who'd been importing British goods in violation of the non-importation agreement. The crowd was throwing things at the shop. Stones, garbage, the usual. Richardson came out with a gun, said he was defending his property, said the crowd was going to tear the place apart. He fired into the crowd, into a crowd full of children. The ball hit Christopher in the chest. He fell in the street, blood spreading across his shirt, and by the time anyone could get him to a doctor, it was too late. 11 years old, died because he threw a rock at a window. Here's what gets me about this. Richardson was arrested. Good. He was tried. Good. He was convicted of murder. Great. Then the governor pardoned him. Let him go. Because apparently killing an 11-year-old isn't a crime if the 11-year-old was being disrespectful to a loyalist merchant. You want to know why the revolution happened? This is why. The funeral was 5 days later. You'd never seen anything like it. They started at the Liberty Tree. Thousands of people gathered there, packed so tight you could barely move. Men and women and children, rich merchants and poor labourers, everyone dressed in their darkest clothes, everyone silent. The coffin was small, too small. It sat on a cart decorated with banners that read, "The Fatal Effects of Arbitrary Government." The procession stretched for half a mile, maybe more. Some said 5,000 people marched. Others said closer to 10,000. In a city of 16,000, that's most of the population. Children walking alongside their parents. Old men who hadn't left their homes in years. Everyone. And here's the thing about colonial funerals. They're usually an excuse to get drunk. Seriously. The family sets up a table, everyone views the body, and then you drink until you can't feel feelings anymore. It's tradition, but not this one. This one was silent. No drinking, no socializing. Just thousands of people walking through the streets of Boston, following the body of an 11-year-old boy and not saying a word. They buried him in the granary burying ground, near the graves of men who'd founded this city 100 years before. A minister said words that you couldn't hear from where you stood. Then it was over. But it wasn't over. Not really. The mood in Boston after the funeral was something you'd never felt before. Not the hot anger of the Stamp Act riots. This was colder, harder, the kind of anger that doesn't burn itself out in a single night. People looked at soldiers differently now, not with fear, not even with hatred exactly, with something else, a kind of calculation, a weighing of costs and benefits, like they were measuring things, deciding things, planning things that didn't need to be said out loud. And the soldiers looked back. they knew something had changed. You could see it in the way they walked. Always in pairs now, never alone. Their hands always near their weapons. They'd killed a child. Even the ones who hadn't pulled the trigger knew what that meant. The whole city was staring at them, waiting, wondering which one of them would be next to do something unforgivable. Here's something you learn about occupation. It's not the big confrontations that break people. It's the small ones, the daily humiliations, the soldier who shoves you off the sidewalk because he can, the officer who stops you to check your papers when you're just trying to get home, the patrol that decides to search your pockets for no reason except that they're bored and you're there, day after day after day, until you can't remember what it felt like to walk through your own city without being afraid. The first week of March came in cold and grey. Snow on the ground, ice in the harbour, a bitter wind that cut through your coat like it wasn't there. The rope walk was busy with spring orders, ships getting ready to sail as soon as the weather broke. You worked long hours, dawn to dusk, your hands raw and your back aching. On the 2nd of March, a Monday, the soldiers came back. You were at your station near the middle of the walk when you heard shouting from the entrance. A soldier had come in looking for work again, and one of the workers, a man named Samuel Gray, had told him where he could go, but not politely. Samuel told him to go clean the outhouse. The soldier swung at him. Samuel swung back. Within minutes, the whole rope walk had emptied into the street. Workers poured out of the building, grabbing whatever they could find. Clubs, rope ends, tools. The soldiers called for reinforcements, and soon there were dozens of them, red coats everywhere, the whole street turning into a brawl. Here's the thing about a street fight with soldiers. They have training, they have weapons, they have each other's backs. What you have is numbers and anger, and a lifetime of resentment that's been building since the first redcoat stepped off a boat in your harbour. Sometimes that's enough, sometimes it's not. You don't remember much of what happened next, just fragments. A soldier's face twisted with rage coming at you, the crack of a club against someone's skull, shouting and screaming and the taste of blood in your mouth, though you weren't sure if it was yours or someone else's. The smell of sweat and fear and something else, something that smelled like the start of a war. It lasted maybe 20 minutes. Then the officers arrived and broke it up, dragging soldiers back to their barracks, ordering the townspeople to disperse. You stood in the street, breathing hard, your knuckles split and bleeding, watching the redcoats retreat. "This isn't over," someone said beside you. A rope maker, his face bruised, his eyes bright with something dangerous. Not by a long shot. He was right. Over the next 2 days there were more fights, smaller ones scattered across the town, soldiers and civilians clashing wherever they met. The officers tried to keep their men confined to barracks, but some of them slipped out anyway, looking for revenge. And the townspeople were looking too. Groups of young men roaming the streets after dark, carrying clubs, daring any soldier they saw to start something. It was like the whole city had caught fire, a slow burn that nobody could put out. Wednesday night, the 4th of March, you went to the Green Dragon. The basement was packed. More men than you'd ever seen there, crammed into every corner, talking in urgent whispers. The air was thick with tobacco smoke and tension. "Something's going to happen," James said. He'd come in from Griffin's Wharf, still wearing his work clothes, his face grim. "Tomorrow, the 5th, I can feel it." "What do you mean?" "I don't know, He shook his head. "It's like a storm coming. You can smell it in the air." You knew what he meant. You'd felt it too. That pressure behind your eyes, that tightness in your chest. The whole city felt like a rope pulled too tight, fibers straining, ready to snap. 3 days of fighting, 3 days of soldiers and workers beating each other bloody in the streets. 3 days of threats and counter-threats and promises of revenge. Something had to give. Eid stood up at the front of the room. The crowd went quiet. "I know what you're all thinking," he said. "I know what you're feeling. Believe me, I feel it too. But I'm asking you, all of you, to keep your heads. Don't give them what they want. Don't be the ones to start this." "And if they start it," someone called out. Edie's was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Then God help us all." Someone in the back laughed. But it wasn't a funny laugh. It was the laugh of a man who's made his peace with something. The laugh of a man who knows what's coming and has decided he's ready for it. You walked home through streets that felt different, quieter, tenser. A patrol of soldiers passed you, and for once they didn't stop, didn't say anything, just kept marching with their eyes straight ahead. They felt it too. Everyone felt it. At the boarding house, you lay on your mattress and stared at the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come. Your mind kept running through the events of the past week. The funeral, the fight, the look on that soldier's face when he came at you with his fists raised. Tomorrow, the 5th of March, something was going to happen. You didn't know what. You didn't know where. But you knew it was coming, as sure as you knew the sun would rise. Outside your window, Boston waited. 16,000 people, lying in their beds, dreaming their separate dreams. Soldiers in their barracks, gripping their muskets, wondering what the morning would bring. The night was cold. The city was quiet. But not for long. The 5th of March started like any other day. You woke before dawn, same as always. Ate your breakfast of cold bread and weak beer. Walked to the rope walk in the grey light, your breath making clouds in the frozen air. Worked your station, spinning hemp into cordage, your hands moving through the familiar motions without needing to think about it. The tension from the past few days hung over everything. Men spoke in low voices, glancing toward the door whenever someone came in. But the work continued. It always continued. Ships still needed rope. The world didn't stop just because Boston was ready to explode. Samuel Gray was working a few stations down from you. You'd gotten to know him better over the past year, ever since you'd transferred to this rope walk. He was older than you by a decade, a family man with a wife and 2 children waiting for him at home. Good worker, quick with a joke. The kind of man who could lighten a room just by walking into it. He'd been in the thick of the fight on Monday, taken a nasty cut above his eye that was still scabbed over. When you'd asked him about it, he'd just shrugged. "Should see the other fellow," he'd said, and grinned. That was Samuel, always ready with a smile even when things were falling apart. The afternoon passed slowly. The light through the windows turned from grey to gold to grey again as the sun moved across the sky. By the time the work bell rang at dusk, your shoulders were aching and your fingers were numb from the cold that crept in through every crack in the walls. You walked home through streets that felt too quiet. Most people had gone inside already, doors shut tight against the cold and whatever else might be coming. A few soldiers passed you, moving in tight formation, their faces hard. You kept your eyes down and kept walking. At the boarding house you ate a quick supper, boiled fish and more bread. Mistress Hutchins seemed nervous, jumping at every sound from outside. When you asked her what was wrong, she just shook her head. "Something in the air tonight," she said. "Can't you feel it?" You could feel it. That same pressure you'd felt for days, but stronger now. Like the moment before lightning strikes, when the hair on your arm stands up and your skin prickles with electricity. You should have stayed inside, should have gone to bed early, pulled the blanket over your head, waited for morning. That's what the smart play would have been. But you've never been that smart. Around 8 o'clock you heard shouting from somewhere toward the centre of town. Then the church bell started ringing. Not the regular toll that marked the hours, but the urgent clanging that meant fire or trouble. You grabbed your coat and went out into the night. The streets were filling with people, all of them moving in the same direction. Toward King Street, toward the custom house. You joined the flow, not quite running, not quite walking, your heart beating faster with every step. The crowd thickened as you got closer. Men and boys mostly, but some women too. Everyone talking at once, voices rising over each other, fragments of conversation drifting past. Soldier hit him with his musket, calling for reinforcements. Bloody lobsterbacks think they can... The cold bit through your coat, but you barely noticed. Your blood was up now, the same heat you'd felt during the fight on Monday, the same anger that had been simmering for years. The snow crunched under your boots as you pushed forward, elbowing past men you didn't recognize, stepping over chunks of ice that had already been thrown. The smell hit you before you could see anything clearly. Torch smoke and unwashed bodies and something else. Something sharp like metal. Fear, maybe. Or excitement. Hard to tell the difference when they're mixed together like that. You pushed through the crowd until you could see what was happening. The custom house sat at the corner of King Street, a solid brick building that housed the tax collectors and their records. A lone sentry had been posted outside it all winter, standing guard in a little wooden box near the door. Tonight that sentry was surrounded. A crowd of maybe 50 people had gathered around him. Boys were throwing snowballs and chunks of ice. Men were shouting insults. The sentry, a young private with a face white as the snow around him, had his musket raised, the bayonet fixed and gleaming in the torchlight. "Go ahead and fire," someone yelled. "I dare you!" The sentry didn't fire. He just stood there, his back against the wall, his eyes wild with fear. You pushed closer, trying to see better. That's when you spotted Samuel Gray, near the front of the crowd. He saw you too and waved you over. "Hell of a thing," he said when you reached him. "Started about an hour ago. Some wig-maker's boy got into it with an officer over money. That sentry there, Private White, he cracked the boy over the head with his musket. Now look at this mess." The crowd was getting bigger. More people arriving every minute, drawn by the bells, by the shouting, by the same electricity in the air that had pulled you out of your bed. 100 people now, maybe more. Then someone yelled that soldiers were coming. They marched down King Street in formation. 7 of them plus an officer, their boots crunching on the packed snow, their bayonets fixed. The crowd parted to let them through, then closed in behind them. The officer was a captain named Preston. You'd seen him before, around town, a middle-aged man with a lined face and tired eyes. He led his men to the custom house and formed them up in a semicircle around Private White, facing the crowd. 8 soldiers now, 8 muskets, and a crowd that had swelled to 300, maybe 400, pressing in from all sides. The air smelled like smoke and sweat and something else. Fear, maybe, or hatred. Hard to tell the difference when they're mixed together like that. Torches flickered everywhere. casting wild shadows that made everything look like a nightmare. Someone threw a snowball. It hit one of the soldiers in the face, knocking his hat off. The crowd laughed. More snowballs followed. Chunks of ice, oyster shells, anything people could find on the ground. Someone threw a club. Someone else threw what looked like a frozen cat. The soldiers just stood there, taking it, their faces slick with sweat despite the cold. "Fire, you cowards!" the cry went up from somewhere in the crowd. "Fire if you dare!" And here's the thing about muskets. They're terrifying even when they're not being fired. Each one of those Brown Bess muskets weighs about 10 pounds. The bayonet attached to the front is 17 inches of steel. The ball it fires is nearly 3/4 of an inch across, big enough to take off a limb. 8 of them pointed at you from 10 feet away. And the men holding them are scared. You can see it in their eyes. Scared men with guns. Nothing more dangerous in the world. The soldiers stood their ground, muskets raised, their faces slick with sweat despite the cold. Captain Preston was shouting something, trying to be heard over the noise, but nobody was listening. You were maybe 20 feet from the line of soldiers, close enough to see the whites of their eyes, close enough to see how their hands shook on their weapons. Samuel was closer, right up front, shouting with the rest of them. "Sam," you called out. "Sam, get back." He didn't hear you, or maybe he did and didn't care. He was caught up in it now, same as everyone else. The rage of the past months, the past years, all of it boiling over at once. Someone threw a club. It hit one of the soldiers and knocked him down. He scrambled back to his feet, his face twisted with fury. What happened next took maybe 10 seconds. It felt like an hour. The soldier who'd been knocked down raised his musket and fired. The crack of the shot cut through the noise of the crowd like a knife. For a moment everything stopped, everyone frozen, staring, not quite believing what had just happened. Then more shots, one after another, the soldiers firing into the crowd, smoke and flame erupting from their muskets, the sound so loud it hurt your ears. People were screaming now, running, falling. You saw a man go down not 10 feet from where you stood, his chest torn open, blood spraying across the snow. You saw another man stumble backward, clutching his arm, his face a mask of shock. And you saw Samuel Gray. He was still standing when the first shot hit him, still standing when the second one did. Then his legs buckled and he went down slow, like he was kneeling to pray. He fell face first into the snow and didn't move. "Sam!" You tried to run to him. Someone grabbed your arm, pulled you back. The crowd was surging now, people pushing in every direction, and you couldn't get through, couldn't reach him, could only watch as the snow around his body turned red. The firing stopped. The smoke cleared. Captain Preston was screaming at his men, shoving their muskets down, his face twisted with horror at what had just happened. In the street, 5 bodies lay still. 5 men who'd been alive 30 seconds ago. Around them, others writhed and moaned, clutching wounds, crying for help. You recognized one of the bodies. A big man, dark-skinned, who worked as a sailor on the ships that came through the harbour. Crispus, his name was. Attucks. You'd seen him at the docks a dozen times, loading and unloading cargo with hands that could lift barrels like they were empty baskets. Some people said he was half Native American. Some said he was a runaway slave. Nobody knew for sure. What you knew was that he was the first to fall, and he was gone before he hit the ground. 2 musket balls to the chest. Beside him, a boy, Samuel Maverick, 17 years old. Same age as you were when you first came to Boston. His eyes were still open, staring at the night sky, snowflakes landing on his face and not melting anymore. He'd been walking home from visiting friends. Wrong place, wrong time, dead. James Caldwell, Patrick Carr, and Samuel Gray, who had a wife and children waiting at home. Samuel, who'd been standing right next to you at the rope walk fight 3 days ago. Samuel, who'd grinned and said, "Should see the other fellow," like it was all some kind of joke. Samuel Gray didn't move, didn't make a sound. He was gone. You don't remember much of what happened after that. Just fragments again. Shouting, more bells. Someone saying the word massacre over and over. The crowd pressing forward again, hundreds of people screaming for blood, and the soldiers retreating into the custom house, barricading the door behind them. At some point, the lieutenant governor appeared. Hutchinson, his name was. He stood on a balcony above the crowd and promised that justice would be done, that the soldiers would be arrested, that there would be a trial. The crowd didn't believe him. Why would they? But the promises were enough to calm things down, at least for the moment. Slowly, reluctantly, people began to drift away. You stayed. You stayed until they loaded Samuel's body onto a cart, until they covered him with a sheet that turned red within seconds, until the cart rolled away toward wherever they took the dead, its wheels leaving tracks in the bloody snow. Then you walked home. The streets were quiet now. Everyone had gone inside, stunned into silence by what had happened. You walked through the empty lanes like a ghost, your feet moving without any input from your brain. Your hands were shaking. You couldn't make them stop. Blood on the snow. That's what you kept seeing every time you blinked. The way it spread, dark and wet, steaming slightly in the cold air. The way Samuel had fallen slow, like time itself had stretched out to make sure you saw every moment of it. You passed the custom house again without meaning to. The soldiers were gone now, arrested and taken away. But the blood was still there, dark stains on the white ground, and people had started gathering, staring at it, pointing, talking in hushed voices. A woman was crying somewhere nearby. A man was shouting that this was war, that the time for talking was over. Someone else was praying, the words drifting through the cold air like smoke. You kept walking. At the boarding house, Mistress Hutchins took one look at your face and didn't ask any questions, just handed you a cup of something warm and guided you to a chair by the fire. You sat there until dawn, didn't sleep, didn't speak, just stared at the flames and thought about Samuel Gray. He had a wife, 2 children. They were probably awake right now, waiting for him to come home. Maybe they'd heard the bells, the shots, the screaming. Maybe they were sitting by their own fire, hoping, praying that he was safe. He wasn't safe. He was dead in the street because he'd been angry at the same things everyone was angry at. Because he'd been standing in the wrong place at the wrong moment. Because 8 soldiers had panicked and fired their muskets into a crowd of unarmed people. You thought about the soldier who'd shot him, wondered if he was feeling anything right now. Guilt, fear, relief that he'd survived. You thought about Captain Preston, the look on his face after the shooting stopped, the horror of a man who'd just watched everything fall apart. You thought about the boy from the funeral, Christopher Sider, 11 years old, and now Samuel, and Crispus Attucks, the sailor with the strong hands, and that 17-year-old boy whose name you didn't even know. How many more? How many more bodies before this was over? Outside you could hear voices, people moving through the streets again, the shock wearing off, the anger taking its place. Word was spreading across the city, across the colony, and by morning everyone would know what had happened on King Street. The soldiers had fired on civilians. 5 men were dead. Everything had changed. You thought about Eads, about Paul and Joseph and all the others at the Green Dragon. They'd been saying for months that something had to give. Well, it had given. The rope had finally snapped, and now there was no putting it back together. The fire burned low. The sky outside the window turned from black to grey. A new day was starting. The 6th of March, 1770. The first day of whatever came next. Somewhere in the city, Samuel's wife was waking up to find that her husband wasn't coming home. Somewhere, children were learning that their father was gone. And somewhere 8 soldiers were sitting in jail cells, waiting to find out if they'd hang for what they'd done. You closed your eyes, just for a moment, and in the darkness behind your lids you could still see it. The flash of muskets, the blood on the snow, Samuel falling slow, like he was kneeling to pray. The boy's eyes still open, staring at nothing. Some things you never stop seeing. Some nights never really end. They buried them 3 days later, all 5 of them, together. Samuel Gray, Crispus Attucks, James Caldwell, Samuel Maverick, Patrick Carr. 5 men who'd been alive on Monday night, dead by Tuesday morning, lowered into the frozen ground on Thursday afternoon while half of Boston watched. The funeral made Christopher Cedar's procession look small. 10,000 people, some said, maybe more. The whole city turned out, and people from the surrounding towns too, farmers and merchants and tradesmen who'd heard what happened and wanted to bear witness. 4 of the coffins left from different houses across the city. Samuel's came from his home near the rope walk, carried by men you'd worked beside for years. Crispus Attucks and James Caldwell shared a hearse that started from Faneuil Hall. They met at the Liberty Tree, all 4 hearses converging at once, and from there the procession moved as one toward the granary burying ground. You walked near the front, close enough to see the coffin swaying with each step the bearers took, close enough to hear Samuel's widow crying somewhere behind you, a sound that cut through the silence like a knife. The streets were lined 6 deep on both sides. People in windows, people on rooftops. Everywhere you looked, faces watching, hats removed, heads bowed. The bells of every church in Boston were ringing, that same slow toll you'd heard at Cider's funeral, but louder now, fuller, like the whole city was mourning at once. They buried them in a single grave, all 5 together side by side the way they'd fallen in the street. A minister spoke words that the wind carried away before they reached you. Then it was over, but it wasn't over. In the weeks that followed, something strange happened. The anger that had been building for years, that had finally exploded on King Street, didn't fade. It spread. It grew. It took on a life of its own. Paul was at the centre of it. The silversmith you'd met at the Green Dragon, the one with the steady hands and the quick mind. Turns out he was an engraver too, and a few weeks after the funeral he produced something that changed everything. You saw it for the first time at Eads's print shop. A copper plate engraving showing the massacre as Paul imagined it. British soldiers lined up in neat rows, firing in unison into a helpless crowd. Captain Preston standing behind them with his sword raised, ordering the volley. The custom house in the background relabelled Butcher's Hall. Bodies falling, blood pooling, smoke rising from the muskets. Here's the thing about this engraving. Paul didn't actually see the massacre. He wasn't there. He based it partly on another engraver's work, a guy named Henry Pelham, who was furious when he found out, called Paul a thief. But Paul got his version printed first, and that's the one everyone remembers. The colours were garish. Bright red coats on the soldiers, bright red blood on the cobblestones, a blue sky overhead that made the whole scene look almost cheerful, which somehow made it worse, like a children's picture book about murder. And here's another thing. In the engraving, the soldiers are white. In reality, one of them was black, a guy named Andrew. But Paul made him white in the picture because propaganda doesn't do nuance. And Crispus Attucks, the first to fall, the man of African and native descent, he's barely visible in the image at all. It wasn't accurate. You'd been there. You knew it hadn't happened like that, all orderly and deliberate. It had been chaos, confusion, scared men on both sides making terrible decisions in a matter of seconds. The soldiers hadn't been lined up neatly. Captain Preston hadn't raised his sword like some kind of conductor. The crowd hadn't been innocent bystanders standing peacefully in the street. But accuracy wasn't the point. The point was the feeling, the outrage, the image of British tyranny made visible, something people could look at and understand without needing to read a word. "It's propaganda," you said to Edie's the first time you saw it. He shrugged. "It's the truth, just simplified. That's not what happened. It's what people need to believe happened." He looked at you with those tired eyes. "You think the king tells the truth about us? You think Parliament debates the facts before they pass their taxes? This is a war, Daniel, and in war the story matters as much as the sword." Edie's printed hundreds of copies, then thousands. They spread across the colonies like fire through dry grass. Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Charleston. Everywhere people looked at that engraving and saw what the British were capable of, what they'd done, what they might do again. You kept a copy for yourself, pinned it to the wall above your bed in the boarding house. Some nights you'd lie there staring at it, trying to match the neat lines of the engraving to the messy reality of what you'd witnessed. They never quite fit together. But maybe that didn't matter. Maybe what mattered was that people were paying attention now. The whole world was watching Boston. The trials came in the fall. Captain Preston went first, in October, then the soldiers, in November and December. The whole city was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen. Would they hang? Would there be justice for the 5 men in the granary? The defence lawyer surprised everyone. John Adams, one of the loudest voices against British tyranny, a man who'd been at the Green Dragon, who'd argued for resistance, who'd helped organise the non-importation agreements. And now he was standing in court, defending the soldiers who'd killed 5 of his countrymen. People were furious, called him a traitor, a turncoat, worse things you won't repeat. Someone threw a rock through his window. His law practice suffered. Friends stopped speaking to him. But here's the thing about John Adams. He was playing a long game. He knew that if these soldiers didn't get a fair trial, the Crown would use it as proof that the colonies were lawless, that we couldn't govern ourselves, that we needed British control. So he defended them. He gave them the best defence he could, and in doing so, he proved that even in the middle of a revolution, Boston still believed in justice. Also, let's be honest, the prosecution's case was kind of a mess. Witnesses contradicted each other. Some of them were clearly drunk that night and couldn't remember what happened. One guy claimed he saw everything clearly from a block away, in the dark, through a crowd of 400 people. Adams picked those testimonies apart like a man filleting a fish. But Adams didn't back down. said everyone deserved a fair trial, even redcoats, said the law had to mean something or none of this was worth fighting for. You went to the trial one day, stood in the back of the courtroom, squeezed between dozens of other spectators, watching Adams do his work. He was good. You had to admit that. He picked apart the prosecution's witnesses, pointed out contradictions in their testimony, reminded the jury that a mob had been throwing ice and shells and shouting fire before the first shot was ever discharged. Facts are stubborn things, he said at one point, his voice filling the courtroom, and whatever may be our wishes, our inclinations, or the dictates of our passion, they cannot alter the state of facts and evidence. You didn't know what to think. Part of you wanted to see those soldiers hang, wanted to watch them kick and twitch at the end of a rope the way Samuel had twitched in the snow before he went still. Wanted someone to pay for what happened, really pay, not just get a slap on the wrist and a ticket home. But another part of you, a quieter part, understood what Adams was trying to do. If we become like them, what's the point? If we throw out the law whenever it's inconvenient, how are we any better than the tyrants we're fighting against? The verdicts came down in December. Preston was acquitted. The jury said the evidence didn't prove he'd given the order to fire. 6 of the soldiers were acquitted too. Not enough proof, the jury said. Too much confusion that night. Too many conflicting stories. 2 soldiers were convicted, Montgomery and Kilroy, the ones who definitely fired, whose musket balls had definitely killed. But not murder, manslaughter, a lesser charge. Instead of hanging, they were branded on the thumb, a hot iron pressed into their flesh, marking them forever as killers. Then they were released. That was it. That was justice. 2 burned thumbs for 5 dead men. The Green Dragon was quiet that night. Nobody knew what to say. Ede sat in the corner staring at nothing. Paul was there too, his face hard, his hands clenched into fists on the table in front of him. "We'll remember this," someone said finally. "Every year on the 5th of March, we'll remember what they did." And they did. Every year after that, the anniversary of the massacre was marked with speeches and ceremonies. Church bells ringing at the hour the shots were fired. Orators recounting what happened, making sure nobody forgot. The 5 graves in the granary became a pilgrimage site, a place where people came to pay their respects and renew their anger. But life went on. That's the thing about tragedy. It doesn't stop the world from turning. The soldiers left Boston, all of them, shipped out to Castle William in the harbour, then eventually back to England. The common emptied. The barracks came down. The streets that had been full of redcoats for 2 years were suddenly, strangely quiet. You went back to the rope walk, back to the work, spinning hemp, pulling cables, earning your wages. The days blurred together the way they always had. Spring turned to summer, summer to fall, fall to winter. Another year passed, then another. 1771, 1772, the early months of 1773. Boston settled into something like normalcy. The non-importation agreements fell apart as merchants got tired of losing money. Ships came and went from the harbour. People bought British goods again, drank British tea, tried to pretend that everything was fine. But it wasn't fine. You knew it. Everyone knew it. The anger was still there, just buried deeper, waiting. You moved out of the boarding house that spring, found a small room above a chandler's shop on Fish Street closer to the harbour. It wasn't much. A bed, a table, a chair, a window that looked out over the water. But it was yours. The first space you'd ever had that belonged to just you. At night, you'd sit by that window and watch the ships at anchor. their lanterns swaying with the tide. You'd think about all the places those ships had been. London, Liverpool, the Sugar Islands, Africa. A whole world out there that you'd never seen, might never see. Sometimes you wondered what would have happened if you'd gone with William, shipped out to the West Indies, left all this behind. But you hadn't. You'd stayed. And now you were too deep in to leave. At the Green Dragon, the meetings continued. Smaller now, quieter. The fever pitch of 69 and 70 had faded, but the core group remained. Edie's and Paul and Joseph and the others, planning, watching, waiting for the next move. You turned 25, then 26. The scars on your knuckles from the rope walk fight faded to white lines. The images from that night on King Street grew softer around the edges, less sharp, though they never disappeared entirely. Some mornings you'd wake up and for a moment you wouldn't remember. Then it would all come flooding back. Samuel's widow remarried. You heard about it from James, who still worked at the rope walk near Griffin's Wharf. A good man, he said, a carpenter, someone who could take care of her and the children. You were glad for her, glad that life could continue, that grief didn't have to last forever. James had married his Sarah by then, had a baby on the way. He talked about the future now in a way he never had before, about the shop he wanted to open, the life he wanted to build. He still came to the Green Dragon sometimes, but less often. He had other things to think about. You understood. People change. Priorities shift. The fire that burns so hot in your 20s starts to cool as you get older, as you realize that revolutions are long and life is short and there are other things worth caring about. But you hadn't cooled. Not yet. The memory of Samuel falling kept the fire lit. The sight of those soldiers marching away unpunished. The knowledge that nothing had really changed. That the king still saw you as subjects to be taxed and controlled. That all the blood spilled on King Street had bought nothing but a temporary reprieve. Something else would happen. You were sure of it. Parliament would push again, and Boston would push back, and the whole cycle would start over. It was just a matter of time. In the spring of 1773, word came from London. A new act. Something about tea. You didn't pay much attention at first. Tea seemed like such a small thing compared to everything that had happened. The Tea Act, they called it. Parliament had given the East India Company a monopoly on selling tea in the colonies. No more buying from Dutch smugglers or local merchants. If you wanted tea, you bought it from the company, and you paid the tax that came with it. It didn't sound like much. A few pennies on a pound of leaves. But the men at the Green Dragon understood what it really meant. This wasn't about tea. It was about the principle. If Parliament could tax tea, they could tax anything. If they could grant monopolies to their favoured companies, they could destroy any colonial business they wanted. It was the Stamp Act all over again, just dressed up in different clothes. But the men at the Green Dragon were paying attention. Edis was writing furiously, pages of notes spread across his table. Paul was making trips to the harbour, talking to ship captains, gathering information. Joseph was convening meetings, more meetings, the old urgency creeping back into his voice. Word spread that 3 ships were on their way from London. The Dartmouth, the Eleanor, the Beaver, all loaded with East India Company tea, all heading for Boston Harbour. "We have to send it back," someone said at one of the meetings. "Refuse to let it land. Send a message they can't ignore." "The governor won't allow it," Edis replied. "Hutchinson's already said the ships can't leave until the tea is unloaded and the duty paid." "Then we don't let them unload." "And if they try anyway?" Silence. Everyone knew what that meant. Another confrontation. Maybe another massacre. More blood in the streets. "This is it," Joseph said one night, his eyes bright in the candlelight. "This is the moment we've been waiting for. You didn't understand yet, but you would. By December, everyone would understand." The tea ships were coming. The Dartmouth sailed into Boston Harbor on a grey November morning. You were at the rope walk when word came, a boy running down the street shouting that the tea ship had arrived. Everyone stopped working. Everyone looked at each other. This was it. The moment they'd been talking about for months. The ship anchored at Griffin's Wharf, right where James worked. Within hours, guards were posted to make sure nobody tried to unload the cargo or destroy it. The owner, a man named Roch, was summoned to meeting after meeting, pressured from all sides. The governor wanted the tea landed and the duty paid. The Sons of Liberty wanted it sent back to England. Roch was caught in the middle, a man with a ship full of leaves that nobody wanted and everyone was fighting over. 2 more ships arrived in the days that followed, the Eleanor, the Beaver. All 3 sat at Griffin's Wharf, their holds packed with East India Company tea, while Boston tried to figure out what to do. The law gave them 20 days. 20 days from the Dartmouth's arrival to pay the duty. If the deadline passed without payment, the customs officials could seize the cargo and sell it themselves. The tea would land either way. The tax would be paid either way, unless something changed. The meetings at Old South Meeting House drew thousands. You went to one, squeezed into the back of the building with 6,000 or 7,000 other people, the air thick with body heat and tension. Samuel Adams stood at the front, his voice carrying over the crowd, laying out the situation in terms everyone could understand. "We must act," he said. "If this tea lands, if this duty is paid, we lose everything we've fought for, every principle, every sacrifice, the blood of the men who died on King Street, all of it, for nothing." The crowd roared its agreement, but agreement wasn't a plan, and the deadline was approaching fast. December 16th, a Thursday, cold and clear. The kind of winter day where the sky looks like pale blue glass and your breath hangs in the air like smoke. You went to work that morning like any other day, but everyone knew something was going to happen. The final meeting was scheduled for that afternoon. Roch had been sent to ask the governor one last time for permission to leave without unloading. Everyone was waiting to hear what Hutchinson would say. The answer came around 6 in the evening, just as darkness was falling. Roch returned from the governor's mansion with the news everyone expected. No, the ships could not leave. The tea would be landed. The duty would be paid. That was the end of it. Except it wasn't. Samuel Adams stood up in the crowded meeting house and spoke the words that everyone was waiting for. "This meeting can do nothing more to save the country." That was the signal. You were outside when you heard the war whoops, men pouring out of the meeting house heading for the harbour, their faces already smeared with soot and coal dust. Some wore blankets wrapped around their shoulders. Some had feathers stuck in their hats. They're dressed as Indians, or something like Indians, a disguise that fooled no one but gave everyone deniability. You fell in with them, didn't think about it, just started walking, then jogging, then running toward Griffin's Wharf. Your heart was pounding, your hands were shaking, but your feet knew where to go. By the time you reached the wharf, there were maybe 150 men gathered, maybe more. It was hard to count in the darkness with everyone's faces blackened, everyone dressed in the same rough disguises. You recognized some of them anyway. Men from the rope walk, men from the Green Dragon. Paul was there, somewhere. James too. You could feel their presence even if you couldn't see their faces. Someone handed you a hatchet. Someone else pointed you toward the Dartmouth. "Chests are in the hold," he said. "Drag them up, break them open, dump the tea, nothing else. Don't take anything. Don't damage anything except the tea. Understood?" You nodded. You understood. The work was hard, harder than you expected. Each chest weighed maybe 400 pounds, and they had to be hauled up from the hold by hand, dragged across the deck, broken open with axes and hatchets, then dumped over the side. The tea floated at first, spreading across the dark water like a stain. Then it started to sink, or drift away with the current, and you'd go back for another chest. Here's something nobody tells you about the Boston Tea Party. It took 3 hours. 3 hours of back-breaking labour. In the cold, in the dark, with wet feet and blistered hands and lungs full of tea dust. This wasn't some quick symbolic gesture. This was work. Real work. The kind of work that leaves you sore for days. And here's another thing. The men were incredibly careful not to damage anything except the tea. Someone accidentally broke a padlock. They replaced it the next day. Someone's shoes got tea in them. They shook them out over the water. A guy tried to stuff some tea in his pockets to take home. The others beat him up and threw him off the ship. This wasn't looting. This was a statement. The smell was everywhere. Rich and earthy. Almost sweet. It mixed with the salt of the harbour and the tar of the ships and the sweat of the men working beside you. Your hands blistered, then bled, then went numb. Your shoulders burned from the hauling. But you kept going. Everyone kept going. At one point you paused to catch your breath and looked around. The deck was chaos. Men swarming over the chests, hatchets rising and falling, tea cascading over the gunwale into the black water below. But it was organised chaos, controlled. Nobody was looting. Nobody was smashing things for the sake of smashing them. This was work, honest work, the kind you'd done your whole life, just with a different purpose tonight. A man worked beside you whose face you couldn't see through the soot, but you knew his hands, workers' hands, calloused and strong. A rope maker, maybe, or a shipwright. Someone who knew what it meant to labour for a living, to trade your sweat for pennies while men in London got rich off your back. He caught you looking and nodded once. That was all. Then he went back to work, and so did you. 3 hours. That's how long it took. 3 hours of hauling and chopping and dumping, the sweat freezing on your face despite the cold, your arms burning, your back screaming. Nobody spoke except to give orders. No jokes, no cheering, just work. The tide was coming in, and you could see the tea piling up against the hulls of the ships, a thick brown sludge that reeked of wealth and waste. Some of the boys in the crowd had waded out to their knees, pushing the tea away from shore with oars and paddles, making sure none of it could be salvaged. 342 chests, 92,000 pounds of tea, worth more than 10,000 pounds sterling. In today's money, that's roughly $1.7 million. All of it gone, floating in Boston Harbour, steeping in the salt water like the world's biggest, most expensive, most illegal pot of tea. The tide was so thick with tea that for days afterward you could smell it from anywhere in town. Kids waded out at low tide to push the floating tea deeper into the harbour, with oars and paddles, making sure none of it could be salvaged. The harbour looked brown for weeks, and here's the best part. Nobody talked. Ever. 150 men participated in the tea party, and not a single one of them was ever officially identified. They went to their graves without confessing. It wasn't until decades later, when the participants were old men and the danger had passed, that anyone started admitting they'd been there. Even then, some of them never told. When it was done, you climbed back onto the wharf with the others. Someone was sweeping the decks of the ships, making sure no tea was left behind. Someone else was shaking out their shoes, dumping the loose leaves that had gotten inside. They wanted it known that this wasn't about theft. Nobody had taken anything for themselves. This was a statement, a protest, a message to the king and parliament that couldn't be ignored. You walked home through streets that were strangely quiet. The crowds that had gathered at the harbour were dispersing, melting into the darkness, going back to their homes and their beds. A few people passed you on the street, glancing at your blackened face, your damp clothes, the hatchet still in your hand. Nobody said anything. Nobody needed to. The moon was up now, hanging low over the rooftops, casting silver light across the cobblestones. Your footsteps echoed in the empty lanes. You walked past the old state house, past the spot where Samuel Gray had fallen, past the Green Dragon with its windows dark and its doors shut tight. The city felt different tonight. Smaller somehow. Or maybe you felt bigger, like you'd grown into something you hadn't been before. Not a hero, nothing so grand as that. Just a man who'd finally done something instead of just talking about it. At your room on Fish Street, you washed the soot from your face and hands. The water in the basin turned black. Your clothes smelled like tea, a rich, earthy smell that would linger for days. You hung them by the window to air out, then sat on the edge of your bed, too tired to sleep, too wired to rest. Outside, the harbour was quiet. The 3 ships sat at their moorings, their holds empty now, their decks clean. Somewhere out there, 92,000 pounds of tea was dissolving into the Atlantic, drifting out with the tide, gone forever. You thought about what would happen next. The king would hear about this. Parliament would hear about it. There would be consequences, probably severe ones. Boston had just dumped a fortune into the harbour, had openly defied the crown in a way that couldn't be explained away or smoothed over. This was different from riots and protests. This was destruction of property. This was rebellion. They would call it the Boston Tea Party, eventually. Years later, when it had become legend instead of just something that happened on a cold December night. But you didn't know that yet. You didn't know about the intolerable acts that would come in response, or the Continental Congress, or the shots at Lexington and Concord. You didn't know that in less than 2 years you'd be watching British ships bombard Charlestown from across the harbour, watching the city burn. All of that was still in the future, hidden, waiting. But you couldn't bring yourself to regret it. Not tonight. Tonight you just felt empty, hollowed out, like you'd been carrying something heavy for years and had finally set it down. You lay back on your bed and stared at the ceiling. The same ceiling you'd stared at 1,000 nights before. The same cracks, the same water stains, the same shadows cast by the candle on your table. But everything was different now. You could feel it. Something had shifted, some balance had tipped, and there was no going back. The tea was in the harbour. The message had been sent. Whatever came next, it would come. Outside your window, Boston slept. 16,000 people, most of them unaware of what had happened tonight, what it would mean for their futures, their children's futures, their children's children. They'd find out tomorrow. The whole world would find out. And then everything would change. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, you closed your eyes and let the exhaustion wash over you. Your muscles ached, your hands were raw. But you were warm and you were safe, and for the first time in a long time you felt something like peace. You'd done what you could. What happened next was out of your hands. The wind off the harbour rattled your window gently. The candle on your table flickered and went out, leaving you in darkness. Somewhere in the city a dog barked once and fell silent. The night wrapped around you like a blanket, soft and dark and quiet. This is how it was, how it really was. Not the paintings in museums or the stories in books. Not heroes in perfect costumes making speeches for the ages. Just ordinary people doing what they thought was right, scared and tired and uncertain, hoping that somehow it would all work out. You were one of them. Daniel the rope maker. Nobody special, nobody famous. Just a man who happened to be in Boston when history decided to happen. And now, 250 years later, that same city is still there. The harbour still opens to the sea. Ships still come and go, though they're bigger now, carrying different cargo. The streets you walked are still streets, though they've been paved and repaved 100 times. The Old North Church still stands in the North End. Faneuil Hall still stands downtown. The graves in the granary are still there, still visited, still remembered. The world changed. The country you helped create grew into something nobody could have imagined back then. Wars were fought. Laws were written. Generations were born and lived and died. And through all of it, the story of what happened in Boston kept being told. The tea in the harbour, the shots on King Street. The ordinary people who did extraordinary things because they believed they deserved to be free. That's the thing about history. It's not really about the past. It's about understanding how we got here. How all those small decisions, all those cold mornings and hard days and sleepless nights added up to something bigger than any one person could see at the time. You couldn't see it. Lying there in your room on Fish Street, the smell of tea still on your skin. You didn't know that the revolution was coming, that independence would be declared, that the country you helped birth would still be here in the 21st century. All you knew was that you were tired, and that tomorrow would bring whatever it brought, and that for now, for this one moment, you could rest. So close your eyes. Let the tension drain from your shoulders. Feel the warmth of your own bed, your own blankets, your own safe place in this complicated world. History is just people. People who lived and breathed and worried and hoped, just like you. People who made choices without knowing how they'd turn out. People who went to sleep at night wondering if they'd done the right thing. You're part of that chain now. Everyone who's ever lived is part of that chain. The past flowing into the present flowing into the future, all of it connected, all of it leading somewhere none of us can see. But you don't have to see it tonight. Tonight, you can just rest. Let the story settle into your bones. Let the images fade into dreams. The harbour, the tea, the ships rocking gently at anchor. Daniel walking home through empty streets, his work finally done. Sleep well. Tomorrow is another day, and history, as always, will be waiting.